welcome members of the Washington Hebrew congregation. I know more are signing on. We've had a very nice response to our policy, predicament, and the promise, understanding Israel today and tomorrow. These have been very challenging times these last weeks, and we're all breathing a bit of a relief because there has been a bit of a lull in the incredible violence, but it does not mean that we can desist from understanding and beginning to understand what we can do. For some of you, you know that I began my relationship with Israel when I was in high school. I went and studied in Israel and lived at near Kfar Saba at Beit Beryl. I was a student in high school. As a good Southerner, I spoke little or no Hebrew. I often tell the story that my Mishpacha Ma'ametzet, my adopted family on Moshav Sofit, sent me into Kfar Saba for one simple thing. I was supposed to go, and I knew where it was. Right next to my favorite falafel stand was the butcher, and I was supposed to get oaf, chicken. But I went in and I said, I wrote said kof, which is, instead of saying I want a chicken, I want a monkey. And he looked at me and he said in perfect English, there's only one here, son. So my relationship with Israel has been as coming as someone who felt a part of Israel immensely, and from the time I was in high school, but really understood that my perspective and understanding was very different from the people that lived in Israel, and my relationship as somebody coming to Israel was very different. I've extended that relationship for the last 50 years in terms of participating in all sorts of things. And one of my great delights in that is that I was on a program at Kibbutz Malach HaMisha, which was called a beautiful program where I lived a year in Israel and studied. And that program later on was on Kibbutz Surah, and Julian Resnick, who has become our scholar in residence many times, who has led us and who I consider both a friend and a remarkable teacher, is with us tonight. And we're also joined, and I'm going to share something in a minute, but we're also joined by Muhammad Fahili, who I was introduced to by Julian, and Muhammad, many of you know, participated and was our ambassador from Israel, who spoke at Washington Hebrew congregation and really told us his amazing story. And it has been, it was a privilege. Julian traveled with him and that. So there are two of us. So that means that Riman Barkat, who comes to us from East Jerusalem and who is part of something called Experience Palestine, and who lives in East Jerusalem and has been working most of her life supporting and preserving Palestinian culture, and joins us. I'm delighted, but this means incumbent upon you. You'll now have to come to the United States and be a speaker at Washington Hebrew. It's what Julian negotiated when he asked you to come along. So I want to thank you. I have traveled in many, many places, and we were in a cemetery in Morocco with Julian and a group of us who had a magnificent trip. And Julian read a poem there, and he's probably going to chastise me because when I paraphrase it, I'm sure I'm not going to do it justice. But basically, it is a man who goes into a cemetery and places a group of flowers on his mother's grave, and he sees a woman who lays out a tablecloth and beautiful food on her parents' grave and begins to eat. And he kind of looks at her and says, "You think your parents will enjoy the smell of the food?" And she looks back at him and says, "I'm sure they'll enjoy it as much as your parents will enjoy the smell of the flowers." It is a really important poem, which I'm sure I bastardized in so many ways, but Julian will correct me. But what it taught me at that moment is that we all approach things from the perspective and from the eyes and from the place where sometimes we place judgment or think that because it's comfortable and it's where we come, it's all that we know. And really true learning is being able to sometimes do like the old books that we had when we started, the readers of Jane and Jack, that said, stop, look, and listen. And sometimes we have to stop, look, and listen to really understand. Tonight, we have a important program to have. It is important we have people that are with us from all who are living this and who are pursuers of peace. Julian Resnick has been living in Israel, and he's a tour guide, and he's a teacher, and he was associated with Habonim, and he's been a shaliach in America, and he's done all those things. But above all, he's a person in my experience, has been a pursuer of peace and understanding. And when I say peace, I don't mean the absence of war. I mean peace in the sense of shalom from shalem, which means in fullness, and understanding what it is to be fully human, fully Jewish, and fully embracing the moment. And so, Julian, I want to thank you, and I want to thank our guests, and I'm going to introduce each of them in a minute. Before we do that, it is 3 o'clock in the morning it's now 5 after 3 in the morning for our guests, and we want to do that. I want to call on one of our members, if I can find him in here. I'm going to gallery, a board member, Ed Joseph, and I'm going to ask Ed I'm going to add him on Spotlight. I'm asking Ed Joseph to read. We begin our conversations at Washington Hebrew called Congregational Conversations with a pledge for civility. I used to have it to put up. I forgot to do that, but listen carefully because Edward's going to read it to us. And this is something that we make as a commitment for this conversation and for all of our conversations at Washington Hebrew. Edward, thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Lustig. Let me read this civility pledge here for us. We pledge to guard our tongues, showing care for the dignity of every human being, even those with whom we may strongly disagree. We will listen carefully when others speak, seeking to understand what is being said and trying to learn from it. We pledge that these discussions will remain welcoming to all.
Thank you so much. I also want to just thank Rabbi Miller, and Rabbi Miller is going to, just during this thing, he's going to be monitoring the chat. So if you put things in, we're not going to interrupt our flow of conversation, but Aaron's going to maybe jot down some of those. We want people to see the other things in the chat. And I want to thank Aaron, who has helped me in establishing this, and we have deep and long conversations about our relationship to Israel and our responsibilities to teach about it. So Rabbi Miller, thank you so much. And I have some questions for him later on as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Julian and let him tell you how bad I did on the poem.
So I'm not in the business of telling people how well or how badly they did. So Bruce, you get flying colors from me on bringing up that poem. I thought that I'd like to just begin by sharing a couple of thoughts, and also I'm going to share a poem in response to the fact that you chose a poem as well. But I want to start off by saying that I moved to Israel a long time ago. I moved to Israel on the 4th of July, 1976, the day of the bicentennial, and crucially in terms of the way I understand my identity, the day of the Entebbe raid, which some of you will remember knocked the bicentennial off the front page of most newspapers. I have lived here for, how long is that now? For over 45 years. I believe passionately in being Jewish and in Israel. And one of the questions that I think that all of us who really care about who we are have to ask ourselves is, what do we do with our passion? What do we do with the things that we care so desperately about? Do they end up blinding us, or do they end up giving us the possibility to understand the passions of other people? And I think that that's a crucial question, because I find myself surrounded in Israel by people of a range of political persuasions who are as passionate as I am. And the question isn't, is it legitimate for them to be passionate? The question for me ultimately is, what does that passion do to them? What does that passion do to us? I hope that each and every person who is on this evening's event feels very passionate about things and has decided to use that passion in a positive way. And the question for me in a way is, what does a passionate Zionist Jew do about his passion when I find myself sharing a space in which people are equally passionate as I am? And sometimes that passion blinds them. And I want to read just a little poem in response to what Rabbi Lustig read. Forgive me, Bruce, if every now and then I call you Bruce, because I've known you a long time. And some rabbis like always being called Rabbi, but I might slip into Bruce occasionally. I want to read a short poem. I want to tell you where you'll find it, because as you know, I use space, I use sites to try and work on educational messages. This poem you'll find when you walk out the last part of the Rabin Center, the center in Tel Aviv, which is dedicated to the memory of Yitzhak Rabin, our prime minister, who, by the way, was assassinated by a Jew who was equally passionate as Rabin in a different direction, but misunderstood, in my opinion, what one does with passion. And this is the poem by Yehuda Amichai that we see when we leave the Rabin Center. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard, but doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. I decided to share that as an opening, also as part of introducing my two friends and colleagues who are with us this evening, Muhammad Fakhili and Riman Barakat. And I want to just share one little anecdote from about each, and then I'm going to invite Muhammad to continue. Riman will then go after Muhammad, and I will say a few words after that to enable you to pinpoint your questions and how you want to move forward. So I'm constantly on the lookout for people whose voices are going to add something to mine when I take people around Israel. People whose experience, their personality, who they are, the things they do, will just enable us to learn in a much deeper way about this space that we share, Israel and Israel and Palestine. Muhammad, I can't even remember how I met you originally. You know, I'm of that age in which one is allowed to begin to forget initial interactions. But the first time I met Muhammad, I realized that I was actually meeting someone who was really walking the talk and making a special contribution to the city that Muhammad has lived in for almost all of his life, Akko. Akko, a place that has been in the news lately because of the terrible difficulties that we've all been facing in the last month. But Akko, a place that had difficulties beforehand. And what Muhammad has done in Akko, he has faced those difficulties head on and tried to create, and successfully, I would say, have created a space in which it is possible to really deal with this very complex question of how do Jews and Arabs live together? How do we actually do it? Without, not in the realm of sloganing, but in the fact of actually really doing it. How do we do it when people are in pain? How do we do it when people have different dreams? How do we actually do it on the ground with people who might not have the tools that most of us are lucky to have, to turn their experiences into something immediately positive. And I will never forget an experience at Muhammad Fakhidi Center, the Sir Charles Claw Jewish Arab Center in Akko, in which we heard a young girl who had nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with the conflict, a young girl playing the violin. It was so beautiful and so special. I was there together with the folks from Washington Hebrew, just to hear a young girl take that violin out and go beyond being Jewish, go beyond the question of conflict. And I thought I was hearing angels. I'm not much of a believer in angels, but I thought I was hearing angels on that day. And Muhammad understood, I believe, in that particular moment, that it's not about strident voices, about people who can shout louder, people who can make their point maybe in a greater way intellectually, but it's about people who can take out that violin and move us to a place where we understand that there is a common humanity. Riman, I have been with Riman to a place that most Jewish people don't go to. Who goes to Ramallah? Who goes to see what's happening in the heart, the fascinating, throbbing heart of what people are trying to recreate in Palestine? And I've been to Palestine, to Ramallah. I'm being careful of the language over here because I'm going to use the language that Riman is comfortable with, because I think I owe it to her, and talk about Palestine. I've been to meet with people who have extraordinary experiences in Ramallah as Palestinians, people who have messages that are so important for us to hear. Messages, by the way, which I believe that my government tragically prevents us from hearing, or tries as hard as possible for us not to hear. I have been with Riman in places that I have to admit I wouldn't go on my own to. I wouldn't go on my own to because I'm not sure, because of the historical experience of all of us in this region, that I'd be as welcome to. But I will never forget, Riman, being in a restaurant with you in Ramallah, owned by a very impressive Palestinian woman, and hearing her get up and say some very, very harsh things about Jewish people, and having the opportunity to stand up as a Jew and respond, and having her all of a sudden understand that she's talking about people that she hardly ever interacts with over a meal, not people that she might be in a confrontational situation over because they are connected to the questions of security where she lives, but people who are sitting down and eating with her. And that was a powerful moment for me that you actually brought about. I've said enough as an introduction. I want to hand over to Muhammad Fakhidi to continue.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I would like to talk about Akko because, I focus in Akko, I live in Akko, and I care to Akko, and also I care for everybody who lives in the area. Akko, really, it's a peaceful city. Last week we had some problem happening in Akko. I can tell you the problem start with the youth and with the police in Akko. I'm talking about kids 19 to 20 years old, 18, 17. These kids who made all this problem with the police. And I don't agree with a lot of people in Israel. They said there is no coexisting between Jews and Arabs. I believe there is coexisting between Jewish and Arab, especially in Akko. My neighbors, they are Jews, and we're still friends, And we spoke about what happened in Akko, and everybody saw what happened in Akko. And the problem start, I believed, it's my opinion, it start from Netanyahu to Ben Gvir, and start with Al-Aqsa. And Al-Aqsa, it's very, very important place for the Muslim people, and everybody knows that. And Jerusalem, it's important for the Arab and for the Jewish also. And it's my first time, it was my first time in my life I go to the demonstration in Akko. I went there because, you know, what I saw in Sheikh Jarrah and what I saw what's happened in Al-Aqsa. And we were really in peaceful demonstration. But one of the young kids, he raised a Palestinian flag. Then the police attacked the whole demonstration. And we left, and the young kids, they start with, you know, propaganda in, you know, in Akko. And the next day, two buses came from West Bank, from the settlers, you know, to Akko, young kids from Lahava. And, you know, they attack our neighborhood. What is the center? It's mixed neighborhood, Jews and Arabs live in the neighborhood, and they attack the neighborhood. Then the Arab kids, they came to defense in the neighborhood, but we stopped all the people there. But the police, they didn't help us, you know, just, you know, they attacked the Arab as usual, you know. But, you know, we kept quiet, and I'm very, very glad because none of our youth in our center, he was in the demonstration, and he did damage things, you know. And day after that, we start talking about what's happening in Akko, especially the Arab. And what they did in the old city, nobody agree. Nobody agree. They, you know, they burn a restaurant and a hotel and shop for Jews, and it was, you know, disaster. Because this kid, you know, what the police said in the end, you know, 2 days ago, it's 87% of the kids they arrested about 200 kids from Akko. 87% of them, they are criminals, you know, kids. They are dealing with drugs. They are, you know, dealing with like a black market, you know. And this kids, they did what they did in Akko, but the majority of the people in Akko, they didn't like it. They didn't agree. You know, we have the right to demonstration, but we don't have right to destroy and to burn places not belong to us. Even if it's belong to us, I can tell you now, Akko has suffered a lot. Nobody comes to Akko to make shopping or to go to restaurant. It's empty. We've been a week. It's very, very empty city. All the shops just, you know, don't make a money, anything. But, you know, I'm so glad in our community center, we're still working. We didn't close the center. Jews, they still come to the center, and Arabs, they still come to the center because, you know, they knew each other. They've been for many years learning together, for 3, 4, 5 years. They are together. The families knows each other, you know, and they came. And the beginning, some of the Jews, they were afraid, but the others, they encouraged them to come. And, you know, today we had more than 150 Jewish kids and Arab in the center. They learn together. They start, you know, talking about issue. In our center, we don't talk political, you know, just we care for meeting and teaching the kids and the families. But we know, we understand we have to talk about what's happening in Akko. And you can see, you know, I wanted to record it, but people, they didn't want me to record it. But believe me, I like it very much. People, they talk, they don't shout. They just listen to each other. And we told him just, you know, listen, you don't have to agree. Listen to the other, you know, especially for the Jews, you know. And some of the Arab also said, you have to listen to the other also. And we've been like 2 days are talking, you know, with the families and with the youth about what's happening. Nobody agree. Nobody wants it to happen because Akko, it's very, very beautiful city. It's, you know, tourism city. And we are making now a group of adults, you know, to Jews and Arabs who are going to have meeting next week in our community center to start talking how to fix what's happening in Akko, the Jews and Arabs. And I believe it's gonna, you know, finish in 1 month or 2 months. Everything's gonna return back to the same, because, you know, people, they used to live together. it's the first time, you know, we had this problem in Akko, because, not because, you know, the majority of the kids, they don't, you know, understand about Palestine, the Palestinian people, you know. And when they heard about the Al-Aqsa, and the Al-Aqsa, you know, and Sheikh Jarrah, everybody, you know, wanted to make solidarity with Al-Aqsa and with Sheikh Jarrah. But after that, what's happened, it wasn't, you know, for Sheikh Jarrah and for Jerusalem or for Al-Aqsa. Just some of the vandalism, what they did in Akko, and I don't know what's happened in Lod and Yafo, but, you know, I saw in the TV also. And the problem is not only for the Arab, the problem was the youth settlers from Lahava, from Ben Gvir. They go into places just to make problem, you know. And they came to Akko, and I saw by myself what they did in Akko, and unfortunately the police, they don't stop them. This make more problem to be with the youth in Akko, but again, you know, I'm not agree with what they did, you know, for damage and burning places, because, you know, the hotel and the restaurant and the shops, the 100% of the workers, they are Arab. Now they are without work, because until they need about 2-3 months to fix and prepare everything, and we're still waiting for the Jewish people to come to the old city. And let's hope, I believe we will pass this one. And if there is any question, I would like.
Well, we'll reserve some of the questions. One of the things that may be helpful, Mohammed, there are part of us who visited with you, and I don't think everybody may be aware of what you've created in Akko. And just briefly, a little bit, you know, not the full story because it's a beautiful one and they should hear it, but just what happens at the center. And it is totally, it is not funded by government. I'm correct. It's totally independent.
No.
And philosophically, that has given you, I believe, real cachet, really power in the city, because they know that you're not beholden to anyone but to your own principles. Tell them a little bit about what the Klal Center is.
Well, the Klal Center, it's independent, not belong to the city or the government. You know, I established it like 30 years ago, and we have 600 families, Jews and Arabs, come to the center. We start taking for the daycare kids from 3 months to 3 years, and after that we start with a program like English, music, karate, ballet, dancing. We're teaching languages the kids, and we have program for women, and we have program for youth, and we have also program for adults people. And because we are independent, not belong to the city or the government, and the people, they feel free. And we've been working like really for 30 years. We didn't have any problem in the center. Even today, we didn't have security guy in our community center. People, they don't ask for we didn't have any security in the front of the center. We are talking about a huge center, it's 4 floors, and we have 600 families. And every day, Jews and Arabs come to the center, even today, without security guy, because people, they believed in the center, they believed what we are working, because we are not political center. Everybody comes and feel free, because they didn't stop to come to the program. They come to the program, they are, you know, start. We never talk about political issue, but, you know, we've been 2-3 days talking about the political issue, and what's happened, everybody listen to each other. They don't agree. Sometimes they agree, sometimes they don't agree. Like, who comes first, the chicken or the egg, you know? And they agree. Some of them said the chicken comes first, the other said the egg comes first. But we still have the egg and we have the chicken. And this is what we, you know, teach everybody, to listen to the other, to accept the other, and to learn about, especially the Jews. We work hard with the Jews to learn about the Arab. We know a lot of the Jews, but the Jews, they don't know anything about the Arab. And we start in the community, in our community center now, and we're preparing for next month to start with meeting. We start talking about everything, not only education.
Thank you. So that's a beautiful segue to Riman, because often when people come to Israel, we look and talk about Israeli culture and do all these sorts of things, and we're blinded sometimes to an identity that is coexists and has existed for a long time. And you have been recognized for your efforts to preserve and to perpetuate an understanding of the Palestinian culture and a respect, and to make sure that that is part of the fabric of understanding the beauty of the combined city of Jerusalem and the city that's there. So Riman, I'm interested to hear your perspective of what it's been like for you and your thoughts on this.
For sure. So yeah, I was born in East Jerusalem, and I'm from Jerusalem, and today I continue to work very much for Jerusalem. I know that Julian also mentioned my business that was running up till the COVID-19 hit. Which was Experience Palestine. I was taking groups, a lot of Jewish groups actually from the United States and other places to Ramallah and other places in the West Bank, but also to East Jerusalem. But meanwhile, I had also been working in Jerusalem as well in an arts and culture organization that is called the Jerusalem Season of Culture, that has been producing the festival of Mekudeshet Muqaddaseh. And I will say that my role there, I joined there, I got to know this organization in 2014, which was also a significant moment, a very, very difficult moment for Jerusalem, for Israel and Palestine, which also is very reminiscent of, that moment is reminiscent of what we're going through right now, which also kind of now looking at things from that perspective of having gone through so many phases of crises in Israel and Palestine, in Jerusalem, of things of like the fear that each one of us gets to feel on the street when those kinds of things happen. One is the fear. The other is the strong polarization that starts to kind of emerge between the let's say the two nations, and everything else that kind of gets to surface during those times. And as Muhammad says, things kind of like then cool down, but then they again, it takes a few years, and then they kind of erupt. The violence erupts again, which kind of brings me to the importance of doing the day-to-day work, doing work every day, not waiting for those crisis moments to say, let's do something about the situation, but really having this kind of work to get to know the other, really every day, every moment of our lives. And in a lot of ways, where I work in right now, the Jerusalem Season of Culture, this is what we've been trying to do. I came on board to this organization in 2016, but after having been having those conversations since 2014. 2014 has been actually the moment that got me to also say I was very much more involved in political efforts before. The last one was called Breaking the Impasse, which was kind of like involving the Kerry Initiative and a bunch of business people from both sides, which kind of like ended up very sadly, you know, because then in 2014, the Gaza, after kind of like there was this big euphoria and so on that something's going to happen. And then there was another Gaza war and all sorts of other events in Jerusalem that kind of like got us back to where we were, if not like to a worse point than we were. And this is when I kind of like kind of started to look more inwards, but also kind of like to where I was living, and that is Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, with all the tensions and diversity of people that it has, it also has like this beautiful potential, which I got to explore. Now, working in culture and arts and talking about Palestinian art and culture in East Jerusalem is perhaps one of the most difficult things, and one of the most difficult things to kind of like create bridges with. And that's because of the movement of anti-normalization, of BDS. That's because also, particularly in East Jerusalem, there is no political representation for Palestinians in East Jerusalem. And so arts and culture has taken over the role of asserting the Palestinian identity and making sure that is properly expressed. So in Jerusalem, Palestinian arts and culture has an extra responsibility, an extra burden to make that statement. And so my role in an Israeli organization was to kind of like include that Palestinian voice in everything that we do, both artistically and kind of including audiences in our efforts. In 2019, I would say, but maybe before 2019, we were much about putting a lot of spotlight on stage for big audiences and inspiring a lot of people to say things can be different, you know, but it's there for everybody to see. But what we realized then after a few big events like that in 2017 and 2018, that something that is much more local and much more site specific needs to happen. When artists engage, when audiences engage, they need to kind of see each other face to face and meet and talk and be able to experience each other as people. And that's what, and we came across, we were looking into 2019 for a place that would be on the seam line between East and West Jerusalem. And we found this place in Abu Tor, a neighborhood, a southern neighborhood of East Jerusalem, Thori Abu Tor. And we created this cultural house place. We called it Filbet. It was first as a pilot, and eventually in 2020, right before COVID again hit, we moved to this place, and eventually, well, we were lucky. We were lucky also because once things opened a little bit, instead of working inside this place that we had, we went outside. There's a beautiful promenade that's there, and we started to do artistic events there. And the beautiful thing is that people from the neighboring neighborhoods, like Abu Tor, Jabal al-Mukabbir, and so on, were coming just naturally to these events. We, on the other hand, we were making sure that, and that's really important, that everybody feels welcome, that this doesn't feel like an Israeli organization that is kind of coming there to occupy or take over the space. but that everybody feels comfortable. And it was sometimes as simple as offering a cup of coffee with a few people, you know, able to speak the language, Arabic, and so this organic thing grew of people in the neighborhood that came to know us. Now we have much more planned right now. I will say that starting in 2016, I was alone in the organization. I had to do a lot of I had to take my Israeli Jewish colleagues over to East Jerusalem, have them meet with people that you know, it's not comfortable for them to hear. It's hearing narratives that really, you know, like I remember Julian, the first time that I think he met me on the bus, and I said, you know, I run a business called Experience Palestine, and I believe it was you that said, you know, how uncomfortable it sounded. I don't know, maybe you or somebody else, to hear the word Palestine. And so anyway, so that discomfort is something that I exposed my colleagues to, and also it was important that the movement sort of the people of those in East Jerusalem, that they come to West Jerusalem, and vice versa as much as possible, that both sides sort of show their faces and hear each other and talk, but they have to do that consistently. And I would say that we are at a very different place right now, as a team, as an organization, as a community that is around us. We are surrounded by a big community of Palestinian artists that know us, and that took really a lot of recognizing, a lot of listening, a lot of like deciding of, I don't want to change anybody's narrative, you know, of really seeing the others as where they are, and that is kind of like the initial meeting point. And I believe that's the honest way of doing things. Like, I mean, it's easy. I'll just conclude with one thing. It's easy right now, you know, with the conflict going on, with the two sides sort of each side kind of like holding their flags very closely, and defending their own people and their own causes. It's very easy not to see the other side, and it's very easy to kind of demonize the other side. And it's really important in these moments, especially, to continue to see the whole picture. And also, I, as Riman, I'm not responsible. I've learned this over time. I'm not responsible for what the Palestinian Authority is doing and what Hamas is doing. Riman and many other Palestinians are also doing this work every day to make things better every day. And I've seen also so many so many Israeli friends called, very different, by the way, from 2014 and 2015. Many Israeli friends called, sent messages asking what can they do in order to make a difference, for things not to stay the same. And this makes me hopeful despite everything else.
That's great to hear. I just want to ask Julian to comment on something, because I think it's, this goes back to the use of the poem that I mentioned. it is sometimes hard for us to recognize, and Julian, if you could speak to this just for a moment. Riemann talked about and here we have two places that are working on peace, and culture, art and culture is critical to the transformation. And is it still true today that if you would, the third political voice, if not the first political voice, had been for a long time the Israeli writers? In other words, Julian, if you could comment just a little bit of the role of the cultural input on that, if you would, because I think it's something we fail in. And I remember, I think you were with us and maybe even helped arrange this when we saw the part of the play when what was going on in Silwan, and there was such injustice. There was a play that was written jointly, a play, and I can't believe it's the same playwright that caused such controversy at Theater J, because they didn't want him because he's a Palestinian playwright, and chas v'shalom, that, you know, something like that should happen. But he wrote a play, and there were Israelis and Arab Israelis and non-Arab Israelis who put that play on, and eventually they took that play to Akko and showed it there. What's the role of culture in this? And you can probably remember the playwright, I can't.
Bruce, it must have been another bald Israeli man who took you, because it wasn't me.
It's Donnie Yuval was the one who was involved with it, but it was during a group that I thought you were with us when we saw it. But just the role of art and culture.
So, look, I think we have some very powerful and important voices in the community. In the cultural community, and I'm now going to say something which will make very clear my internal Israeli politics, as it were. I think one of the terrible things that has happened in Israel over the last years, and I think that it'll be very clear to all of you who I think is responsible, is that there's been a consistent and concerted effort to delegitimize the voices of intellectuals in Israel, turning them into as it were, the elite. And when I use the word elite in the way that I'm doing my hand signals at the moment, I hope everybody understands. There's a notion that the people in power politically in Israel, I think, have actually pushed very, very, very strongly and worked very hard at it. There's been an attempt to delegitimize the voices of people who really have been speaking through their writings about other possibilities, other ways of being together in this place that we share. And I have to say, I think it's been pretty successful. I think the powers that be in Israel, and particularly the decisions of who is to be the Minister of Culture in recent years, putting as the Minister of Culture probably the person, I'm talking about the woman who was Minister of Culture, Miri Regev, who's probably more anti-culture, more anti-intellectual, more anti any type of serious creative thinking than anybody else in the political realm in Israel. It's had a huge negative impact. And of course, people are working hard to try and counter it, but it's been very powerful, and I have to say, in some way, painfully successful. But if I may, Bruce, I want to continue for a few moments. I want to add in a few other things. First of all, Marty, who just put something up in the chat, it's extraordinary that you actually, in a way, introduced another member of the family of somebody I wanted to bring into the conversation. Marty talked about Muhammad Darausha, somebody that I know very well, but I wanted to say that I had invited somebody else to be part of this evening. Muhammad's niece, in fact, Iman Darausha, who I know very well, who isn't with us because her high school students are sitting the English Bagrut, or school leaving exam, tomorrow. And as a teacher, and I think she made the right decision, she felt her commitment was to her students to be up early in the morning to support them when they write the exam. The reason I mention Iman is twofold. One, Bruce, I want to suggest for you and your community, for your young people, she has created the most wonderful group of young Palestinian students, you know, once again, I want to use the words that people use to identify themselves. I'm not going to call them Israeli Arabs, even though she's a teacher in Ixal, which is just outside Nazareth. She self-defines and her students self-define as Palestinians, and that's obviously as their right.
Just real quick, Julian, for people's reference, up a couple of weeks ago on the blog, there was a short video that was made by her students that talked about.
I put up the I sent out the video made by her students,
and we had it up on our blog.
Great. They are desperately, these young people, they want to be heard. They want to be heard not so that they can, as it were, win, you know, have their side win. They really feel that young Palestinian students are not related to in the way that is appropriate. And one of them once said to me that one of the most insulting moments they ever had was when a young Israeli student, with not meaning to be in any way insulting, asked them if they understood how to use a smartphone. We're talking about sophisticated 16 and 17-year-olds who can hold their own in any situation, in any media, and their English is excellent. So I really recommend it. But the second reason for bringing up Iman, I've been in touch with her all the time during this terrible month, and she said to me in one conversation we had, she said, you know, one of the most painful things for me is when people say things like to Israel, to the IDF, and I do believe, by the way, the IDF has to be strong in certain situations in dealing with terror and missiles. I believe in it very strongly myself. But she said something else that is important to remember. She said, why do people not understand that I have family in Gaza, that I have family members who are suffering at the other end? And she, you know, she believes, like many of my Palestinian friends, that the worst thing that has ever happened to the Palestinian people is Hamas. She said, at the same time, it's my family that is suffering. Can't people understand that it's also my family that is suffering? Can't those gung-ho supporters of Israel also get it, that you can be supportive of Israel and feel as strongly as I do, and I feel very strongly about our right to look after ourselves, and also know that at the other end, there is my family. And I want just one more thing before we get to the questions. You know, the question of how we look at all of these issues, I think very much is a reflection of our own personal stories. Muhammad has an incredible story that he could share, which would be a couple of hours over, an amazing story, really an amazing story that is worthwhile for everyone to hear. I look at this particular event, the events of 2021, through a very particular prism. I am the grandfather of 5 young grandchildren. I have an 18-month-old granddaughter. I have twin grandsons who are 2.5. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter, and I have a 6-year-old granddaughter. Now, when a siren goes off about incoming missiles, and you have 5 little grandchildren, what do? So the first time the siren went off over here for incoming missiles, I didn't go to the shelter. I live on a kibbutz on Sor'ah. My son with 4 grandchildren was on the other side of the kibbutz, about a 5-minute walk. His wife was working, they're both pediatricians at Hadassah. She was doing a night shift at Hadassah. I walked, in spite of the incoming missile situation, I walked over to his house because all I could think about was, what about these little... What about the little guys in this situation? But that's not where my thinking ends. I'm aware that, thank God, we have Iron Dome. I'm aware that most of the incoming missiles can be dealt with, thank God, by our defense system. I'm equally aware that in Gaza, there are grandfathers who don't have that possibility. And that pains me greatly. Pains me as a Jew because of what I believe being Jewish is all about. And it pains me as a grandfather because I cannot begin to imagine what it must feel like to be a grandfather in Gaza, irrespective of the fact that I believe we have to respond vigorously to Hamas, what it means as a grandfather to be in that situation. I can't, you know, it pains me so deeply, as I'd say it again, as a Jew, a Zionist, and as a grandfather. One last thing, and then we have to, I think people have the right to ask questions. I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful that the Jewish people has power. Believe me, I understand Jewish history through a particular lens. I'm very thankful we have power. I'm aware that having power is not only a blessing, it's potentially a curse. Because the question is, when you have power, do you continue to understand that having power is not enough? Do you continue to understand that even though you have Iron Dome, you have to think strategically of the day after, that you have to think strategically of how you create situations in the future in which we won't have to, and I'm going to end with another piece of poetry because I believe very much in poetry, and I want to just read a piece to you. Now, what are we looking forward to? Yehuda Amichai, in a poem called "And Who Will Remember the Rememberers," has a couple of lines that I think we should hear, because this is my fear. He is expressing a fear of people leaders who don't lead strategically. What are they actually bringing us to? And I want to read you these few lines before I hand over back to Rabbi Lustig. And he says the following in the third stanza: "What is the correct way to stand at a memorial ceremony?" Excuse the emotion. "Erect or stooped, pulled taut as a tent, or in the slumped posture of mourning, head bowed like the guilty or held high in a collective protest against death, eyes gazing, frozen at the eyes of the gaping, frozen at the eyes of the dead, or shut tight to see stars inside." Whether you're Jewish or Muslim or Christian, God forbid any of us should stand at mourning ceremonies. And our leaders, whether they call themselves Sinwar or Netanyahu, have a responsibility ultimately to prevent this happening, to prevent us standing at mourning ceremonies. And that is the real question out there. And I'll leave it at that, Bruce, and hand back over to you.
I want to thank you all. You know, we read, and it was posted on our blog, Julian, your beautiful piece that you wrote of you know, how you wrote about your granddaughter, or matter of factly asked you, you know, told you, explained to you, as you said, proud of her newfound knowledge of what one is to do when you hear the siren, and you commented on what a horrible thing that is for a 6-year-old to have that reality. And we know equally. And so what each of us have talked about this evening, and I just want to thank Riman and Mohammed and you, Julian, because this is ultimately what we cannot forget our humanity. We cannot forget that we're all part of one human family. And, you know, whether it is in the Quran or it is in the Torah, we're all, you know, we're said that we're made in an image that not one better than the other, you know. And so it is something that we have to remember. And this begs a question that I want to turn to, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, is that the image that I have from the time I was, you know, 14 years old, living and I didn't realize I actually got to the shores of Jerusalem before you, Julian. I came in 1975. I didn't stay, but actually 73, 74. So the question though is that I was always proud of the phrase that was placed in the Declaration of Independence, which is a phrase that is more progressive than almost any nation state at the time, and even more progressive than today, saying that we will recognize and take in, despite gender, creed, or race or religion, as citizens of the state of Israel. And that reality, in some ways, politically, has been diluted and diminished. Whether it's the national law, whether it's certain things. And these aren't issues of the right to defend oneself. These are coming up the issues about maintaining, quote unquote, for the sake of the Jewishness of the state of Israel. And it really gets to a question that we, as some of us on this are question is that that definition of what is Jewish is fundamentally different for some of the people in the spectrum of Judaism of what that means. I'm going to stop pontificating, stop asking questions, and let's turn it over. I'm going to go to gallery view, and let's see. I don't know. I think Kathy Scheinison had a question early on in in this. So Kathy, if you want to unmute yourself, and I'm trying to find you and see you.
I also want to just share, Diane Vivricek and Bill Davis also sent me questions. Privately, we've been communicating. If Diane and Bill, you'd like to ask as well, you're welcome to do so.
So Kathy, did you want to ask your question?
It's Mark, actually.
Yeah, it's both of us. Just
Okay.
you know, cause and effect. It's not for us sitting so many thousand miles away to judge, but we see these cycles, and you know, East Jerusalem seems, and obviously the mosque on the Temple Mount are such flashpoints, and I'm just wondering, you know, given the reactions that occur kind of consistently and predictably, you know, whether there are any protocols or any learning that goes on from these reactions, so you know, we can kind of stop the catalysts or at least understand what the reaction is likely to be.
Go ahead, Julian.
So, Kathy and Mark, your question is it's an important question. I'm going to give an answer. I'm going to give a couple of points in the answer. The first is that we have a government, but actually for 2 years you really haven't had a proper functioning government. It's one of the real difficulties in the situation. The situation doesn't come out of nowhere. You know, we're in the middle of a political process in which there is jockeying for who is going to control and who's going to form the government. Part of what we've seen in the last month, I have to say, I'm going to sound terribly cynical over here, but I really believe it's true. It has been brought about because of the desire not to lose power. You know, what do you do when you want to hold on to power? You know, there are different things that you can do in different places. But one of the tactics that has been used over here is you try and basically say to people, what we need at the moment is a guy who wields a big stick, because if this guy doesn't wield a big stick, all hell will break loose. And what I think that for me, that, you know, I believe, you know, I'll use a term that probably might, you know, maybe will cause a couple of hackles to arise, but I believe that Netanyahu and Hamas are involved in what I call the dance of death, in which to hold onto power, both of those people, Sinwar and Netanyahu, are prepared to sacrifice many people on the ground. What you've seen at the moment is jockeying for power, is Netanyahu and the people around him trying to hold on to power in some way by any means. I will also say that one of the terrible things that has happened in the last few years in Israel is that the people in power have gone about basically reducing the effective behavior of the people who are responsible for policing the society and the justice system, have done their best to weaken both the police. It'll sound, it might sound strange to Muhammad and Riman that I believe the police has been weakened. The police hasn't been weakened in terms of the people on the streets who are confronting the demonstrators. The police has been weakened in terms of its leadership. Netanyahu has gone about systematically removing any type of strong leadership around him and has replaced them with sycophants and people who will who answer to his beck and call to make sure that he is in power. Now, having said that, I want to say something about a little bit more about the Temple Mount. There is an extraordinary decision of the Israeli Supreme Court that if it was being carried out to the letter of the decision of the Supreme Court, we would have many fewer issues on the Temple Mount. The Israeli Supreme Court made a decision a long time ago that the only people who are allowed to use the Temple Mount for prayer are Muslims. Now, it's an interesting decision because it's a decision made by the Supreme Court of the Jewish state of Israel, saying, for example, that Jews cannot pray there. And if you read the whole decision, and I recommend reading it, it doesn't just say Muslims are the only people who can pray. The court says, the Supreme Court says, all people have the right, have a basic right to pray wherever they want. However, this court is not only responsible for the basic right of prayer, this court is also responsible for maintaining law and order in the state of Israel, worrying about the public domain. And the court recognizes that allowing certain behaviors by people other than the Muslims on Temple Mount would lead to terrible chaos. And tragically, the government of Israel has been undermining that court decision. Now I'm going to say something in the other direction. There are elements in Palestinian society that realize that Al-Aqsa is the flashpoint, and therefore, if you want to undermine the Israeli government, or if you want to undermine the status quo, the very reasonable status quo that has been created by the Supreme Court, use Al-Aqsa. Al-Aqsa has also been used by certain elements in Palestinian society as a weapon. On both sides of this political battle, there are elements who I believe are cynical. You know, Al-Aqsa used to be defined as the mosque. The rest of the area is Haram al-Sharif, and excuse me for my mispronunciation, Muhammad and Rimani, if I am mispronouncing. But for political reasons, the whole of Al-Aqsa, the whole of the Haram al-Sharif is now generally called Al-Aqsa, because if an Israeli policeman stops what he should stop, which is violent behavior at someone in Haram al-Sharif, the term that is used in the international press is Al-Aqsa. There are people on both sides who do not have good intentions, and that is, Mark, I think one of the real issues at the moment. When we have an Israeli government in place, I hope we do, who knows when this is actually going to pan out, I do believe that there'll be more responsible decision making. The problem is you're looking at people jockeying for power at the moment. And people to stay in power, as you are well aware, do all types of things.
So I just want to mention two quick things. One, that when we, Hamza Yosef, who is probably the most prolific and most respected Western Muslim scholar, wrote a piece about, in response, a very even measured piece that spoke about the fact that the document for human fraternity, the Marrakesh document, and there's a string of international documents that all make the place that both, besides citizenship and whatever, that the holy spaces are to be respected. Some of those things were established first by the Israeli government, who at the times turned over the keys to holy places to the very representatives of those religious entities to respect that. And so that undermining of that is something that has been is recognized in terms of, and it is just as offensive for violence to take place, whether it's in the Tree of Life synagogue or violence to take place in the in a church in New Zealand or in the Carolinas, as it is for violence to be taking place in a mosque, or as it's happened in America in a Sikh institution where the bigot thought he was going into a mosque. But it's unfortunate. In any case, this is something. I think Bill Davis had a question, I was told. Go ahead, Bill. You're muted, Bill. There you go.
There I go. Well, my question is, how can Israel continue to function as a Jewish state and be a democracy if it has to declare its non-Jewish Israelis as non-citizens or second-class citizens? How can, I know that's a very difficult question, but I'd like to understand the issues there.
I'm happy to answer, but I also realize that I've spoken a lot. So if anybody else wants to respond.
I didn't hear the question.
So it was a little bit difficult to hear you, Bill. So maybe Bruce, you could.
So he asked the question, how can Israel maintain its democracy and I believe also asking maintain its Jewish identity in a sense, if it and how do you do that and give them, turn without turning Arabs into second-class citizens?
So I look, Muhammad, do you want to go, or do you want whatever you want?
Go ahead, Donald.
So I'm going to. So Bill, I'm going to respond to that. So I think that Bruce mentioned the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence makes it clear that there is every intention for Israel to be both a Jewish state and the state of all its citizens, offering total equality before the law. And I have to say, if you look at the complex history of Israel, we've done very well in certain ways. Muhammad tells the story of what his children have achieved. And I don't want to speak for you, but your children have achieved important things. Muhammad's wife has a very senior position in the Ministry of Education. One of Muhammad's children has over 200 Jewish people working under his directorship in an organization. I have taken groups to meet with an Arab Supreme Court justice. There was an Arab Supreme Court justice who was sitting at the trial that sent the president of Israel to jail, for sexual felonies. I'm not sure maybe I used the wrong term. And I think there are many things that we can be proud of. However, there are certain things in which I think that we have come up short. I'm going to give you a recent example. I think one of the really a mark of shame in the recent years in Israeli society is that the violence that has existed and that exists amongst criminal elements in Arab society has gone unchecked. And I'm going to say something that will sound awful, but I believe it's true, because the bottom line in the Israeli government in recent years has been, look, as long as they're killing each other, who cares? I really believe that is the thing that has been said off the record. And, surprise, surprise, when all of a sudden those criminal elements start attacking Jews when there is another layer to the situation added in, surprise. Who thought that in Lud, in which parts of Lud are controlled by gangs who have a huge stake in drugs in parts of Lud, all of a sudden, surprise, Jewish people are losing their lives as well. Well, we all know that has been happening within Arab society. Why has the Israeli government behaved as if Arab lives are of less worth than Jewish lives in Israel? And I think that, with respect to your question, there's a de jure situation in which the situation, I think, of Israeli Arabs or Palestinians in Israel is actually good, de jure, and then there is a de facto situation in which there's not equal allocation of funds in education. We all know that. There are all types of clever little legal excuses why that happens. But we know the bottom line is that if you are an Orthodox Jewish kid, you're going to get more money than if you're in education than a secular Jewish kid. And if you're a secular Jewish kid, you're going to get more money than if you are an Arab kid. That is unacceptable. For me, it's unacceptable not only as a human being, it's unacceptable as a Jew. My Jewish state doesn't do those things. But, Muhammad, threw into the conversation right at the beginning, Lahava, for example, an organization that has been allowed to flourish. Lahava is, in my terms, a Jewish terrorist organization that is into terrorizing Arabs, goes to mixed weddings. When a Jew decides to marry an Arab, right? Their choice, it might be complicated to do in Israel, but their choice stands outside the wedding with these thugs and tries to intimidate wedding guests. That's not my Judaism. When Ben Gvir, the member of Knesset, unfortunately, that Muhammad mentioned right at the beginning, he would have fitted in, and I'll be blatant, he would have fitted in with the brown shirts on the streets of Munich attacking Jews in the 1930s. When Netanyahu does stuff in the election campaign to make sure that Ben Gvir, who is a racist, who is a fascist, who would really get rid of Arabs and I'm not, I'm using polite language over here in ways that I hope would make all of us feel very uncomfortable. When he's sitting in the Knesset, that's when it is impossible to be both a Jewish and a democratic state. I believe that we are a Jewish state in the way that we behave. We should be in the way that we behave. A Druze soldier once said to me when I was doing a workshop for officers in the Israeli army, I said, what is Jewish about the Israeli army? And the Jewish soldier said, well, Shabbat, kosher food. And the Druze officer said, no, it's the values that we hold. It's the way that we don't destroy trees after in a battle. There's a notion in Judaism that you look after the trees as well. The Druze soldier understood what I think a Jewish state is. It's an inclusive state. It's a state which encourages diversity. It's a state which has, in which the official day of rest is Shabbat, but also, of course, for Muslims there's Friday and for Christians there's Sunday. It's, the question is a good question because it's a difficult balance to hold. It's a very difficult balance to hold. It can only be held if there are people of good faith who are prepared to make sure that the interpretation of what a Jewish state is the one that the founding fathers and mothers of Israel actually intended. It is not the one that is being held by those people who passed the nation state law, which basically gives a preference to Jewish people over other people in Israel in every way possible. And that, I think, folks, is the reason why people like me are not giving up on Israel, not for a single moment, because I believe that I came over here to live in a state that the one that Bruce has just shared over here on the screen, this is the state that I came to live in. I think it's been hijacked.
Will you read that,
who have a
Julian?
different agenda.
Or maybe Mohammed, you'll just read that little paragraph. Can you see it? The state of Israel. Oh, you're muted.
Muhammad, you muted. You have to unmute yourself.
We can't hear.
Atal Shaket.
There you go.
No, Julian, do it. Your English is better than my English.
And we'll let Rima, you read it. Rima.
Sure. The state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exiles. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the prophets of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, or sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religions, and it will be faithful to the principles of the charters of the United Nations.
Thank you. That is something.
The majority of the Israeli Arabs, they will accept a Jewish country with this, full rights and democracy and everything. We agree with that. No problem with us.
And I think that that's an important thing for us to remember, because that is not what the nation state law is stating, and it is not what's happening in Israeli politics. And so the struggle of what a democracy means not only is taking place in America, but certainly taking place in many other places in the world. Other questions I can't see, but Aaron, did some other people come mention to you? Is there anybody? You're muted.
Yes, Diane had a question. I also want to be sensitive to our time and the time difference of our our dialogue partners from a much later time zone.
They're going to go out to breakfast together.
I'm going to go for a walk after this.
Oh my gosh.
All right, where was it, Diane? Which would you want to highlight her? Or there she is, Diane. Let me get you up. I think I got the right Diane. Is this the one?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. This is a great group and a great discussion. And I start out by apologizing that I am really not a student of this conflict. So forgive the sort of naive questions if you could. But I actually had two questions, if I might quickly. One is that, right, I mean, this conflict really just seems, intractable in so many ways, right? There was an Onion article, years ago with the heading was, Middle East conflict intensifies as blah, 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 et cetera, right? The article kind of goes on like that. So one question I might ask is that, what lessons are there that you all are taking from other similarly seemingly intractable conflicts? Northern Ireland comes to mind. I'm sure there are others that you all have studied. So, what do we take from some of those lessons of history? And the other question, if I might ask, is sort of comes from Julian's comments about the dangers and difficulties of a nation that has a lot of power. And as somebody who, right, if I can kind of shift the framing to the US context, I'm somebody who works as a researcher for the United States Department of Defense. And so these are issues and analogs that are sort of front of my mind. I wonder if you could all have any thoughts about, what lessons do the experiences that Israel is having hold for the United States in terms of, what you do when you have power, and what are the right ways to use this power, and where are the lessons and practices that, cautionary tales that we as the United States should be keeping in mind, thinking about analogs and lessons from the Israeli context. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice. Anyone?
I'm always happy, but I realize that I'm always happy to.
Reminder, when you think about this, because you alluded a little bit, what lessons do you think come from this?
I mean, over here, I don't feel like comparing maybe to other cases or in history or geographically, but I'll just compare us over time. Having sort of gone through these cycles, really repetitive cycles over and over again, what I was saying really, what I was referring to is the importance of doing work every day to kind of work towards peace, towards dialogue, towards also bettering our own communities, awareness within each one of our communities, and across the other side. And both are important. And Muhammad mentioned this kind of in the way he was speaking, but what I realized also is that there is a generation younger than mine that is very lost at this point, because
means much younger than mine.
Yes, so
younger than yours is much younger than mine.
I mean, my niece and nephew who are in their 20s, and they haven't kind of like experienced Palestinian nationalism before, and with everything that happens now, they're kind of, before they kind of like they were like, we don't care. And both of them studied at Hebrew universities. Actually, they're both from East Jerusalem, but learned Hebrew, and they're working actually in Jewish Jewish businesses today. Like my niece graduated from Hadassah, and like she is doing research in biotechnology and is now working in a company in Israel. My nephew is working in high tech in Ramat Gan. So like you know, they're working in Israel as East Jerusalemites who don't have an Israeli citizenship, you know, and you know, so this happens, and you know, before they're like very nonchalant about like Israeli-Palestinian issues and so on, and now this hits them in the face, and I'm deeply worried about this this generation, and the fact that that we haven't, neither as Palestinians or Israelis, kind of, I mean, in East Jerusalem, there's just no Palestinian authority, you know, there's no, that's why, you know, like I referred earlier to the role of culture being so important. So who is taking that kind of responsibility for the young, for these young adults, and this worries me a lot. And again, I mean, you know, like Julian pointed to education, to culture, and who the ministers are, and these are really important questions, and it is important to pay attention. I mean, in Palestine, we don't have elections so much, not so often, but in Israel, I mean, in Israel, actually, you do have elections very often now. But so
like we say in Washington, just wait a few minutes. If you don't like the weather, it'll change. So
yeah.
in Israel, if you don't like the slate, just wait a few days, it'll change and change and change and change.
But it doesn't, because Bibi Netanyahu keeps really being re-elected, and that's also something that I think the Israeli public needs to take seriously. The Israeli public and those who go to vote need to kind of get out of their fear and stop believing that Bibi Netanyahu is the only one who's going to defend their security. And I think this is where continuously for the last couple of years, you know, the Israeli public has been falling in the same place and nothing has been changing. I mean, there are other influences, I guess, but I guess the civil society here role, I mean, I believe in it so much, is really important. Art, culture, education, which was, you know, from what I know about Israel, something that has driven, you know, Israel's values, and now, you know, that has weakened so much. And I will say the same thing about, you know, also the Palestinian side, which has become in a lot of ways corrupt, and you know, like we're not talking about the same resources here, of course, but still, you know, it is a responsibility for all.
So I want to thank everybody. I want to keep in mind, you know, we come back to simple sorts of things. I was a camp counselor for a long time. At the time I used to do it, I studied philosophy. So I used to sit my cabin down and I'd say, you know, I need to have authority. It can come out of one of two things. It can come out of fear, or it can come out of love and respect. We have the choice of how we're going to, you know, establish what authority will or won't be. And I think, you know, on a simpler tune is that, you know, this is the choices that we make. And I'm not trying to be Pollyanna in this, but there are, we have to be able to see through the veneer that there are actions that have been done that can be interpreted for political gain, whether it's putting up an obstruction at Damascus Gate to make the trickle and flow, whether it's holding a celebration of a nationalism on the same day as Eid, in terms of Muhammad solved a problem years ago in which in Akko, the two holidays fell at the exact same time. And you could explain to them a little bit of that. Why don't you take a minute? Because what was that? It's Rosh Hashanah and...
No, it was Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur and you know, our, you know, big holiday, sacrifice holiday. And we make barbecue in the morning, the first day, and it was, you know, Yom Kippur. And also was Saturday, you know. And before that, we arranged few meetings with the Arabs in the neighborhood, and we explained for them about the, Yom Kippur and our holiday, but we have another, we have 4 days holiday. Let's, respect our neighbors, not making barbecue, because, when you make barbecue, it's, everybody smell it, and they are fasting, and people, all the Muslim people in the neighborhood, none of them make barbecue that day. You see, because, we've been working for many years in the neighborhood, and with, a lot of people in Akko. People, they, knew each other. People respect each other, I want to add something, like we had a war with Lebanon, and we had in 2014 a war with Gaza, with Hamas. I didn't see the Arab make demonstration and violence. None of them. But this war, this time, it was different, because everybody understood Netanyahu and Ben Gvir, they, it's become the election, the result of the election, it's come in Ramadan. And Netanyahu, he knows he's gonna lose his position. And he starts with Ben Gvir in the holy months in the Muslim people, especially the Al-Aqsa also. The people, they make demonstration not for Gaza, not for Hamas, they made it for the Al-Aqsa and Sheikh Jarrah. This is the difference between all the times, And I think Netanyahu, he made a big mistake. He lets the Israeli Arabs all become together and solidarity with, with Al-Aqsa and with Sheikh Jarrah, which, Hamas use it for them. You see, the Israeli Arabs, they are, supporting us, but they don't support Hamas. They support Al-Aqsa and they support Sheikh Jarrah, not at Hamas.
Well, I want to, given it's going to be 6 o'clock in the morning soon for you guys, I want to thank you not only for staying up with us, but more importantly for and not for sharing us, but for the work that you do each and every day. The real hope and giving us an understanding of what it is to be a Rodef Shalom, a pursuer of peace. It is not something that you do when it's not damping out fires. It is building something that is fireproof. It is building something that is based on human relationships. It's built on something that's built on trust and love and understanding we're all part of one human family, and we want a better tomorrow for all of our children. Julian, I want to thank you for all your help in organizing this and for doing what you always do. And I hope that we'll be able to travel with you again soon in whatever place. I know there are many in the congregation. We look forward to that in many ways. And Riman, I hope that you will come and visit us, but we will certainly come and visit you. And we want to honor Palestinian culture and learn more in terms of that with you. And to my good friend, Mohammed Fahili, and my teacher, what you have created in the Kalal Center is an example for the world of what it is that you can do by doing and treating everybody with dignity and respect and decency. And for folks, you should go on and read about the Kalal Center. It is totally supported by people from around the world, and I hope we will turn and be some of its supporters because they do incredible work. On the day that we heard that angel playing the violin, we also heard a man on the oud, which I have a recording of, and I still listen to often. That is what happens because music was a universal language. The respect and those were people that were lifting up souls. And to all of you, Julian, I just want to tell you that every time I go, the poetry that you give us is not only what you take from Yehuda Amichai, but thank you so much for sharing your reflections. We post them often. It is very important for us to hear. And it is a gift, and we really, really appreciate it. Aaron, thank you so much. Next week, Aaron, tell them a little bit about who we have next week, and we hope people will join us.
Sure. So next week, thank you, Bruce. Next week, we're going to be joined by Jonathan Chandser, He is an academic and researcher who studies international affairs, and he's going to be talking specifically about Hamas, about Fatah, about things going on in the West Bank, and on a larger level, which we have not yet spoken about, the role that Iran plays in its regional aspirations and with the developments that have been taking place over the past year and over the past more years since the end of the JCPOA. So he's going.
Aaron, we also share who you had tried to get to be the guest that you had first suggested.
Sure. So for tonight, and Marty Tillman emailed me or chatted me, and I shared this privately, but we were also hoping to get Mohammed Darwashi, I'm mispronouncing his last name, to join us this evening. He's more committed to his bedtime than our loyal guest tonight. So he was not able to join us. We are still in conversation with him, and we'd certainly like to bring him at some point to talk about the foundational work that he's doing as well. So to be joining at some later date.
So June 2nd, we will join together. To all of you, thank you so much for joining us, and to the members of Washington Hebrew who stopped, looked, and listened. Thank you so much. Julian, again, thank you for your leadership and your teaching, your perspective we always respect, and we really appreciate you continuing to be our scholar in residence, even when you're not in residence. So thank you so much.